Many years ago, I trained to be a teacher. Part of that training, we had to observe other teachers teaching their lessons. I once observed one lesson that I've never forgotten, even now, 20 years later. I observed a philosophy class. The teacher showed the students a photograph of a man, and she asked them, "How tall do you think this man is?" The students looked a bit puzzled. How should we know? 6 foot, 5'10", 5'11". The teacher then showed the students a second photograph. It was of that same man, but behind him there was a massive foot. The top of the man's head only came up to the top of the shoe. "How tall do you think the man is now?" the teacher asked the students. There was a commotion in the class. Was it some sort of optical illusion? Maybe the man was a pixie? Maybe the foot was a giant? Nobody could figure it out. The teacher then showed the students a third picture. A wooden frame was around both the man and the foot. The observers soon realized that the entire image was actually a small picture hanging on somebody's dining room wall. "How tall do you think the man is now?" the teacher asked the students. What happened in that philosophy class is something that every one of us can do, and that is to zoom out. Zooming out means seeing the bigger perspective, the wider picture, and in doing so, you understand the situation or event very differently, and sometimes in a completely opposite way to how you might have understood it in isolation. So why is zooming out so crucial, and how can we do it effectively? Today, we're experiencing a really significant mental health crisis. As we sit here today, across the world, over 280 million adults are struggling with depression. If you walk into the average classroom, 1 in 6 of our students are struggling with their mental health. In the UK alone, in the past year, mental health referrals have increased by 39%. This hasn't happened overnight. In the last 100 years or so, our emotional well-being has been in steady decline. For example, in the 1990s, studies showed that you were 10 times as likely to be depressed then as you would have been 50 years earlier in the 1940s. And that was a time during world conflict. So what's been happening? Where have we been going wrong? And how can we try and make things better? These are massive questions, and we're not going to know all the answers. But researchers have linked the decline in our emotional well-being to the effects of modernization. For example, in China, Chinese society experienced a period of rapid modernization in the 1980s. Prior to that time, depression rates were lower. Following the 1980s, depression rates increased significantly. Of course, you can't make generalizations across entire cultures. But what we do know is that modernization, a key feature of modernization, is individualism. Spending time every day focused on individual goals and activities and spending more and more time each day alone. On the other hand, we know that across all the different types of talking therapies, the key factor of success in emotional recovery is the quality of relationship between the patient and the therapist. We know that across all societies, in communities in which there are high levels of social cohesion, there are fewer mental health difficulties. And we know that today, if you are socially isolated, regardless of whether you actually feel lonely, you are 32% more likely to suffer an early death. Relationships are key, amazingly, not only to our emotional well-being, but to our physical well-being, which means that to have a healthier future, our mindset has to be more relational. Or in other words, we need more opportunities to zoom out. Once I met a Holocaust survivor. When this amazing man was 9 years old, he lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was known as the smuggler in the Warsaw Ghetto. Every night after dark, he risked his life to creep under the fence, escape the ghetto, and run to the nearest Polish village. There he begged for some bread and basic necessities. In the early hours of the morning, he crept back to the ghetto, under the fence, and distributed what he'd collected to his family and friends. When I used to speak to this remarkable man, I used to ask him, how did he survive this ordeal? And how did he get through with his mental health intact? As he was speaking to me and as he was explaining to me what was going through his mind, I realized that effectively he zoomed out. He saw his life as a small piece in a much bigger picture. He knew that he had a duty, a responsibility for his own life, but he knew equally that he also had a responsibility for his family and his community. And this amazing man didn't zoom out as a mental health strategy or to improve his emotional well-being. Rather, it was part and parcel, the very fabric of his identity, that he was connected to his family and part of his community. But here in the West, thanks to individualism, we tell ourselves and our children very different stories about success and achievement. We tell our children to expect unrealistic hopes for their future. For example, has anybody ever said to you, when you grow up, you deserve to be the best that you can be. You deserve to be the best version of yourself and don't let anybody stop you. You deserve to have a job that fulfills you completely, that excites you to go to when you wake up in the morning and leaves you feeling completely satisfied when your head hits that pillow at night. That's a beautiful message, don't get me wrong. But what's it doing to our society? It's creating a society in which our individual goals, our maximum comfort and fulfillment and stimulation are our priority. Relationships and friendships are seen merely as a vehicle to achieve those goals, and sometimes, if they don't help us achieve them, they're disposed of. We're bringing up a generation that can't speak to somebody who they disagree with because it's not worth the hassle. They'd rather just unfriend them on social media, or even worse, block them so that they don't even know that you're not interacting with them. Individualism, that promised us so much and brought with it creativity, artistic expression, progress, has also brought with it much disappointment. Of course, it's unrealistic in the West to adopt a collectivist culture, but what we need to do for a healthier future is to incorporate more collectivist themes and reconstruct our very identities as interconnected and interreliant on others. Social responsibility shouldn't just be a box that we tick on our university application form. So what would a zoomed out, successful future sound like? When you grow up, you can be the person who makes a difference to your family and friends. Perhaps you'll become a pillar of the community. You can be that person who people rely on and will really miss when you're gone. You can be the person who fulfills your duty and is proud to have played your part in your chapter of history. There are at least 3 different ways of zooming out. From that example, you can hear that you can zoom out socially, seeing yourself as part of your family and community and seeing things from their perspective. You can also zoom out in time, listening to the advice of your future self or the wisdom and experience of your past self. As a Jew and as a religious theist, I also believe that you can zoom out existentially, really accessing that wider universal meaning, because I believe that my behavior matters not just to myself, to my family, to my community, to my culture, but on a bigger, deeper level, to a higher power. As the famous philosopher Nietzsche once said, those who have a why to live for can bear with almost any how. Zooming out existentially provides us with that why. Of course, there are many times when we have to zoom in rather than zoom out. If the details of a situation are really important, we have to zoom in on them. For example, I currently work in a perinatal service. I'm a family therapist, and I support mums and their partners who have recently given birth. Sometimes these mums are struggling so significantly that they have really difficult thoughts and feelings about harming themselves or maybe putting their babies at risk. Or sometimes somebody might disclose a safeguarding issue to me, which means that they're concerned that somebody might hurt them or somebody has harmed them in some way. In situations such as these, I zoom out to ask general questions about the context of what happens or those thoughts and feelings, but I can't afford not to zoom in and ask very specific details about the extent, nature, and frequency of those events or those thoughts and feelings, because I have to make sure that these mums are safe. So to assess risk, I have to zoom in. I also have to zoom in for accountability. If I say to a friend or a family member something mean or hurtful, I can't say to them, well, just zoom out. In the scheme of things, I'm a nice, kind friend, I'm warm and generous. That little thing that I said, just zoom out, it doesn't mean anything. Of course not. For accountability, I have to zoom right in, I have to figure out what I did wrong and how to make it better and apologize. So to assess risk, I zoom in, and for accountability, I zoom in. If you think of yourself as holding a camera lens, sometimes it's really important to zoom in and focus on the details. But most of the time, it's more than helpful to take that camera lens and zoom out. I want to end by telling you about Luke. Luke was a 17-year-old boy who struggled with separation anxiety. He'd been to see various therapists, and sometimes the therapy had helped in the short term, but before long the anxiety returned. Finally, Luke went to a family therapist who asked some zoomed-out questions, getting a broader perspective. The therapist asked Luke, who in your family first notices when you're anxious, and what does it mean to them? If your siblings were here, how would they make sense of why you're worried, and what meaning would they give that? This time next year, if you're still as anxious as you are now, what would be different for yourself, for your family, and for your community? By asking these wider questions, the therapist found out that Luke was the youngest of all his siblings. There was a lot of tension between Luke's parents. They weren't getting along too well. In fact, there was so much tension in the home that his older siblings rarely came back even to visit. Luke was a few months away from moving away from home too, and the elephant in the room for the family was that when Luke would leave home, his parents would be left together alone, their relationship would probably deteriorate, and inevitably, they would end up breaking up. Zooming out even further, in Luke's culture and religious context, nobody ever got divorced. No matter how miserable a couple were, they stayed together. And if they did break up, it brought a tremendous sense of shame and failure on their family and community. Suddenly, Luke's anxiety made sense. It wasn't that he had some sort of disorder and he had to correct or analyze his thinking in some way, but rather, Luke's anxiety reflected the difficulty that he was having. The weight of the responsibility of his parents' relationship and their potential breakup was resting on his shoulders, and this was causing him tremendous anxiety. The therapist invited Luke's parents into the sessions, and after some time, Luke's parents embarked on a series of coupled sessions without Luke attending. After some time, Luke's parents had the difficult conversations that meant that they were able to start resolving their difficulties. It was like a weight had been lifted from Luke's shoulders, and his anxiety reduced considerably. He still had to have some individual sessions, but these were much more effective because the overall picture had improved. Of course, every case is different, and there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to mental health difficulties. But when we're struck with a problem, we tend to zoom in closer and closer to the details of the problem, becoming more reductive in our thinking. What we need to do to combat that tendency is to zoom out. Zooming out enables us to access deeper meaning in our lives. It enables us to build our emotional resilience and stop being so self-absorbed and insular, to access expansive thinking. Zooming out enables us to lean on others to recover and not to blame and shame people who are struggling. Zooming out will enable us to live different lives. Let's all start a mental health revolution, and let's all zoom out. Thank you.